Hi, and welcome to this episode of Concise Conversations. Today, we're going to be speaking to Steve Tendon. Steve is the developer of the TameFlow methodology, and we talked to him about how he created it and how he now uses it to help companies find constraints within their organisation and then deal with them holistically. After that, we'll get to know him just a little bit better with the Concise Conversations first 8 questions. Enjoy. Hi Steve, thanks for joining us today on Concise Conversations.
Hello, thank you for having me here. You know, I usually start with, hello, friends of Herbie. That's my trademark.
Yeah, well, I'd like to talk about Herbie and the TameFlow methodology and philosophy a little bit later in the conversation. But before we start with that, I'd just like to ask you how you got there, a bit about your background and what led you into developing the system.
It's a long story. I started off as a software engineer and worked with an amazing company at the time. It was Borland International, the makers of Turbo Pascal and all those legendary tools that defined the development environments in the DOS era before Windows became a thing. And that experience was really fundamental because I was exposed to an environment that was totally focused on performance at all levels, and it shined through their products, which were the fastest of all other competitors in terms of compilers, utilities, and everything. But also, and more importantly, it was everywhere in the company culture, in the way people interacted, and so on and so forth. So that's where my priming on the performance aspects kicked off. Then I left Borland, and it was a great disappointment because all other places were so slow, and it was a drudgery all along. So
So did you think that was just the norm, and that when you left, every other company you went into would be right?
I started off great, and I thought, this is how it should be, and then I discovered how the rest, all other places were, and it was such a disappointment. So long story short, I sort of decided that in all my dealings, I was going to try to recreate that sort of environment, and that led off to a long journey that eventually crystallized and became this thing that I gave the name TameFlow to. But in between that and that, there is a long journey, as I said.
Brilliant. So I see that you also spent a bit. You studied at Aberdeen University? I saw that. Yeah,
that's when I was trying to figure out how to make, recreate that sort of environment that you had in Borland. I started studying many things, and the first deep dive was in patterns, pattern languages, pattern theory, which is really the foundation of TameFlow. It's based on patterns. But then I came across the theory of constraints with David Anderson's book. What was it? Agile Software Engineering Management or something like that. Yeah. That exposed me for the first time, and I think the whole software industry to TOC, the theory of constraints. And for me, it was a wonderful discovery because in TOC you have this focal point, which is the constraint. And it's so important because from my patterns perspective, I had identified 3 foundational patterns, one of which was the unity of purpose. Mm-hmm. Now, if you have the ability to find the constraint, that becomes like a catalyst. The attention of all the company goes on that single point, and therefore it becomes so much easier to create the conditions for the unity of purpose. Now, what's happened? That unfortunately, David's approach was not able to really identify the constraint. In fact, he stated that clearly a few years after. That it's impossible to find the constraint in knowledge work. And that was the origin of the Kanban method. But since the constraint was being thrown out of the window, for me that was a huge problem because I was losing that focal point that allowed me to create the unity of purpose. So I decided to set off to find the constraint, notwithstanding this very uncertain, volatile environment of knowledge work. And at the same time, University of Aberdeen offered a master's program on lean agile software project management.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, maybe they know something more than I do, so let's sign up for that thing. It was not a Scrum Master course of a couple of days. It took me 3 years and lots of writings and research and deep dive in many aspects. But to my dismay, there was no notion of constraints management in all of that. So I got a lot of very deep knowledge in the whole field, and that was also what set off my own research. How do you find the constraint in knowledge work? And I can say now, after this was 10 years ago. After 10 years, I think I've finally cracked the nut, and I got all the bits and pieces together to be able to do that. So University of Aberdeen was really fundamental. Now it allowed me to, no, it didn't allow me, it forced me to do deep dives in all of these project management, agile, lean, all the approaches.
That's quite good, because it's almost like a meta constraint that forced you to work about what are the constraints stopping you finding out about constraints, and it seems like that.
That's a great framing. It was a meta constraint.
And did you live in Aberdeen during that time, or were you just sort of like remote?
No, it was remote. So it was actually one of the first remote master degrees ever globally.
Yeah, cool.
Before COVID,
Yeah, you've no offence to Aberdeen, but you didn't look like a man who would have wanted to spend 3 years in Aberdeen. I've been there a few times myself. I love it.
In any place, but
yes.
Sometimes we get stuck in the places, and that's it.
Yeah. Great. So then, after doing that study, you found out that there was something missing, and then how did you then sort of like manage to sort of define what it was that was missing, and then put that into like a workable framework?
It was maybe a moment where I didn't really know what I was looking for. In fact, if you look at my my blog that I started writing at that time, or just after I finished Aberdeen, to basically to have a conversation with myself to see if I was thinking of anything sensible. Well, that blog was called The Chronologist, and
right.
I had a terrible picture of a hand drawing of a man who was mentally deranged. It was from the Middle Ages. I think maybe it was Leonardo who drew it. It was representing I was getting crazy to find the constraint. I couldn't get my finger onto it. And I also wrote on the sideline of the blog like a short philosophy that this is really like being an alchemist who is in search of the magic formula and picks bits and pieces, ingredients, elements, and tries to put them together to create something precious, gold. For me, the precious thing was finding Herbie. Herbie is the name of the constraint. So it was really a lot of, if you wish, trial and error, and also thanks to Aberdeen, I would say, having the open-mindedness to look at all possible approaches without getting enabled or tied to any special school of thought. So I could look at many things and cherry pick what I liked, what I didn't, but still it was not kind of getting anywhere close to the constraint. And that happened gradually by actually putting in practice these elements on the field, and often when you bang your head with real problems, you finally get how to resolve them.
That's really interesting, because having all the sort of, I don't know, like the the high level understanding of these different approaches meant that you weren't just in one approach and thinking, oh, I bet there's an approach out there that solves this for me. You know, you knew that there wasn't one that solved it for you. So that was actually some sort of blessing in a way that allowed you to go like, well, it isn't there. I need to find it myself, or I need to work it out for myself.
Yeah, I mean, it's since I was searching for something that was not there, I didn't have any preclusions. Yeah. I was literally in search mode, like, or hunting, if you wish. Yeah. Anything that moved, I would aim at, yeah. and then try it. And if it tasted good, I would keep it. Otherwise, I would discard it. So maybe that's a hunting metaphor to keep in mind.
Yeah. Well, some of these things, you know, they can only really be explained through sort of metaphors, can't they?
Well, I use metaphors a lot, even in when I explain and teach about TameFlow, because often it's the little story that gives you the aha moment. I mean, we mentioned Herbie, and Herbie is a story. Shall we tell it?
Yeah, I've heard you talk about Herbie before, and I think it's really great. So yeah, if we could explore that, and you could tell us about Herbie and how that fits into the wider context of TameFlow.
So Herbie comes from the business novel The Goal, who was written by Yahoo Goldratt, and that's where the theory of constraints was popularized. It's the story of a plant manager, Alex, who is finding lots of problems in managing this plant, just like I was finding lots of problem in finding the constraint in knowledge work. And he has like an epiphany when he was leading a group of Boy Scouts on a hike through the woods. And one of these was called Herbie. Now, they started off well, but as they went along, Herbie started to fall back, and then he was at the end of the line, and it was a real problem. Yeah. So Alex called him, shouted, "Herbie, move on!" As if that can make you walk faster.
It's worth a try to start with.
Yeah, but that's what managers do all the time. No, come on, Bob, move on. But that didn't quite work. So then he decided to stop the troop, to regroup, and he had a great idea. So the one risk is that the troop just gets lost in the wood because the line is so long. So he said, okay, now everyone walks behind Herbie. Right. So Herbie was in front. The slowest boy was in front. All others got really grumpy. So why should we walk so slowly? And we could do it double. But at least they kept together. But there was still a problem. They were walking too slow. So they would never reach the base camp before the deadline, which was the sunset, and then it would be dark. So he got another moment of insight and stopped the troop again and asked, well, Herbie, what do you have in your backpack? It seems pretty loaded. And Herbie, being a Boy Scout who's always prepared, he opened the backpack, took out 6 cans of tuna, an axe, all sorts of things. It was really a lot. And then Alex said, well, no, all you other guys, you pick up a piece of Herbie's gear, you put it in your backpack, and Herbie doesn't have to carry anything. And of course they got even more grumpy because not only they had to walk slow, but they have to carry Herbie's stuff. Yeah. But with the unloading of Herbie, he could walk much faster. And the great ending of the story, they all came together to the base camp before sunset. Wow.
Yeah.
So that is the story. It's the metaphor, as you said.
Yeah.
But it contains a lot of wisdom. So it exemplifies the 5 focusing steps which Goldratt defined to manage the constraint. One is identify Herbie. No, sorry, identify the constraint. It was Herbie, move on.
In this case.
And second is to subordinate, so you all walk behind the constraint.
Yeah.
Second is to Oh dear, I always confuse them. The word is really ugly, to exploit the constraint.
Right.
But it means that you allow the constraint to work at maximum capacity.
Yeah.
Third is to subordinate, so everyone walks behind. And the fourth is to elevate, to increase the capacity of the constraint. Number 5 is interesting because it's don't relax. Repeat the process over again, because once you have found the constraint and you have elevated the constraint, maybe someone else will become the one who walks the slowest.
Sure.
So you have to keep on repeating this process. So it's a process of ongoing improvements all the time.
Yeah, I mean, that's cool, because like once you've explained the story, then it's easier to explain the theory that you've abstracted from that, and then you can start thinking about it more from an organizational perspective and start bring it into your own thinking when you're talking to your team.
I tell I keep on repeating this story when I'm working with clients, and at the end they say, "You're a broken record. Even the walls know about this story." Then I know they have understood it.
Yeah, well, never. That's why the story keeps getting told, because there's always something to learn from it, and you can always, there's always people that haven't heard it.
Yeah.
So, how do you then approach companies on a practical basis? Do you are there different ways that you approach them, or is there one way you want to go in and work with them, or you want to do workshops with them? How do you actually interact with your clients generally?
Well, I've always been active on the field, and one advantage I have over other approaches is that TameFlow, it's called Tame the Flow, because I deal with 4 flows.
4 flows, cool.
The first one is financial flow, the second is operational, third is informational, and fourth is psychological flow. Now, why is this important? Well, I listed them in, let's say, the order which in general matters most for businesses. So financial flow is first.
Of course.
Operational flow, well, it's the stuff that needs to get done, the stuff that the engineering department has to produce. Informational flow is how you communicate, how you coordinate, synchronize, make decisions. And psychological flow, it's the last thing they think about. Keep people happy. Who cares about that? No, it's the last thing. But it is also the most difficult one. So I reserve it to address it when all other flows are fixed. But the thing is that since I have 4 flows, depending on whom I am talking with in the company, I might start with one or the other.
Right.
So, for instance, if the entry point is HR, of course, psychological flow is the first one. It's not the last one.
Yeah.
If I'm speaking with a CIO, it's informational flow.
Yeah.
Typically, I would be compared to the agile approaches, Scrum, Kanban, SAFe, and that's the realm of operational flow.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you have the C-levels, the CEO and the CFO, that you want to know, what's the bottom line result?
Yeah.
And that's financial flow. So I'm very flexible. I'm very adaptive.
It kind of makes me feel similar to me like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. How when one of them is solved, you can move on to the next one. But bizarrely, people are thinking about the top one. And then you're able to move up and down that hierarchy and jump in depending on what level each person you're talking to is thinking at.
In a way, yes. Although Maslow is probably not the best parallel. If you want something that is closer to the thinking in terms of organizational development, maybe Laloux's model is the one that we could refer to. I consider it entirely compatible with what I do with TameFlow, and in general, these let's say psychological development models are quite close. In fact, if you look at Lalou, one thing that he states, and which I totally agree with, is that any company will never be able to improve beyond, let's say, the level of the CEO.
Mm-hmm.
So if the CEO has a mindset, a mind frame that is tied, say, only to the financial aspects, you will have a very classical, traditional company where financial reporting is the most important thing, and that alone creates negative consequences, for instance, in the operational flow, because from a financial perspective, you will be pursuing like resource efficiency, cost accounting, which means, hey, I pay your salary, you better work all the time to the maximum of your capacity, without realizing that in the operational flow, that creates a problem because it creates overload, and overload degrades performance. So someone who is focusing on financial flow, to improve performance, they must understand the impact of their decisions on operational flow, and maybe revisit the criteria by which they take decisions in order not to overload the operational flow. Now, when you get to the operational flow, we have like all the agile approaches, which are dealing with it quite well, but they are lacking the capability of talking to the C levels. They don't have the financial arguments, which is one thing that with TameFlow I put at the center of all action, because unless you have the CEO on board, as we said before, you won't go beyond the level of the CEO. So you must have the CEO on board. Well, unless you have the CEO on board, you will not make any improvement. But if the CEO has to develop its perspective on reality, well, at a certain point, they must understand operational flow. So operations must speak to finance.
Yeah.
If you look at Agile, that is completely lacking. Maybe we have a few signs in Safe and Disciplined Agile where they start looking into things like cost of delay. They start looking into things like the budgeting and funding model of the value streams. Yeah. But it's still a very limited perspective. It doesn't look at the finance of the whole. And then, if you're able to fix the operational flow as Agile does, you still have the next problem, which is how is let's say, the nervous system of the company working? How does information flow back and forth between, let's say, the receptors, so people on the ground, and the decision makers, people at the top? That is something that is also quite ignored in the Agile space, and that's where I work on the flow of information. And then finally, if the COO is still with you after all this, then finally you can address the psychological flow, and that's where I refer to the works of the late Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. So giving like the optimal experience, which is a condition of happiness. So I would say, TameFlow leads to happiness, believe it or not.
Well, that's always the dream, isn't it? To create a system that ultimately leads to happiness. So you're obviously focused on constraints and removing constraints, but are there ever any times where you think it makes sense to create constraints within the system to sort of make things move more efficiently overall?
We must define what constraint means,
right?
Because that idea of an enabling constraint is a valid idea, but it's not consistent with the constraints management thinking, right? Because with the constraints management, the axiom, the premise is that there is one constraint that mostly limits the entire system. And at times it might be difficult, confusing to find it, and at times you are creating those conditions of difficulty, so you need to clear stuff up and be able to discern, let's say, the signal from the noise to really find where the constraint is. But in relation to what you just said, there is, in my work, there is a huge attention given to trying to keep the system as stable as possible.
Yeah.
Because in the 5 focusing step, the last step says, keep on looking, keep on watching, because the constraint might move. And it's true, it will move. No matter what you do, it will move. So you have to be equipped in order to be able to detect the movement and also where it's moving to, where is the next point. But still, I strive to keep the constraint in the same place as much as possible. So in terms of enabling that to happen, before you start improving the constraint, so before giving a pair of super fast running shoes to Herbie, just to give an example, you would care to make sure that all the surrounding colleagues still have more capacity than Herbie.
Yeah.
Because then Herbie remains Herbie and the system becomes stable. If Herbie becomes faster than the system, than all others, then the constraint will move. When it moves, you are inducing instability, and yes, you have to start all over again. So in that sense, the enablement is to always increase. Well, in principle, you should only increase the capacity of Herbie. But if that capacity gets beyond what the surrounding is, you should first increase the capacity of the surrounding and then the capacity of Herbie.
Right.
And in that sense, it is like similar to what you're saying of an enabling constraint. You enable the constraint to remain the constraint.
Yeah. And
sounds counterintuitive.
Yeah. Well, so do you think that the biggest success that you bring to like working with companies is not overcoming the specific problem, but teaching them that mindset so that they can then move forward with that understanding?
Exactly. You said mindset, but the word I use is mental models, which comes from the work of Peter Senge.
Yeah.
And the mental models are so fundamental that I say, the ultimate constraint is a mental model.
Yeah.
Because mental models, they give you your interpretation of reality. I and you could be like parachuted in exactly the same situation, but you will interpret in one way, I will interpret in another way, in virtue of our different mental models.
Yeah.
And those mental models turn into decisions, and decisions turn into action, and action change the reality. So if we have different mental models, our similar or equivalent initial conditions will evolve differently, because we apply different decisions and different actions. And therefore, what I strive to teach is teach only a few mental models.
Right.
Very, very few. But here's the big difference with other approaches. But you teach these few concepts to all people in the organization, from the CEO to the, as I say, the latest junior hire, which is always Herbie. Now, why is this different? Well, because if you look at let's say the other scaling framework like SAFe, they will give you all sorts of courses, one for the Scrum Master, one for the release train engineer, and all the titles they have, the product owner, and what else. So everyone gets like specialized training. And I say, yes, of course, professional training is always important, but if you want to address the performance of the organization as a whole, that is not the best thing you can do. The best thing you can do is to create one shared mental model which allows you to pursue the unity of purpose and creates this amazing synergy that across the organization, decisions made will all be coherent and consistent. So you stop eradicating a lot of friction and conflict that you see all the time in the organizations with silos, different KPIs. Why do you have different KPIs? Because the different heads of departments have different mental models. What is important for one is not important for the other. But if they share the same mental model, they also arrive at consistent, coherent decisions, because what is important for one is important for the other. Yeah. And one can trust the other because of this, in virtue of this. So we are creating Another big pattern of TameFlow is the community of trust. That you trust people, you can trust them because you know that their decisions will not harm you, in virtue of the shared mental models. So you see, it's a bit of a circular thinking here, but it's all a reinforcing circle.
Yeah. Like I see that. So if you know you've got a shared mental model, then you know that no matter what, even if someone makes a mistake, they're making the mistake for the right reasons, and you can address that rather than, they've not made a mistake because they're pursuing their agenda, and there's just that friction. It's like a completely...
You take away the blame culture. You address the blame culture, and not only, but from a management perspective, another big idea of TOC is that management attention is one of the biggest constraints, of course, because you're up there alone on the top of the company. You have to deal with so many things underneath that your attention is stretched really, really thin.
Yeah.
Now, if you have shared mental models, what does that enable you? Well, number one, as I said, you can trust your subordinates, so to say, your reports in a much deeper level. But even more importantly, you can delegate decision making. So decision making becomes peripheral. It's decisions are made on the ground where the people are exposed to the problem, and they don't need to ask permission or consult senior managers. And when decisions are made on the ground, things happen much, much faster. And with the shared mental models, they go in the direction that the top managers would like to see.
Yeah.
So there are even these like very positive effects. And this is really one of the key things that you can sell to managers, in the sense that we know how heavy your backpack is, dear Herbie. You have so many decisions to make all the time on all aspects of the company. What if your decision backlog could be, reduced by 60, 70, 80%? Wow, tell me how.
Yeah.
Well, let's work on it. Share it.
That's brilliant. Well, that's been really great being able to talk to you about, the methodology. I've learned a lot. So I think all of our listeners and viewers will also have learned a lot from it. So just in conclusion, sort of like, how are you looking forward to the future? Have you got a lot of stuff coming up? Are you busy? Are you excited? Are you looking forward to the post-COVID world?
Well, I think everyone is looking forward to the post-COVID. But yes, I think we are in this industry which is either based on software or is software intensive. Software is eating the world. No matter what kind of industry you are in, you most likely are dependent on software or are even developing software.
Yeah.
Just take the automotive industry now. Cars are computers on wheels. We all know that, and there are many other examples. So, the ways and methods to develop software or knowledge work in general will be of prominent importance. They will really give the edge, the decisive competitive advantage to those who pick the best methods. And Agile, by all means, Agile has had an important role in history, but it's gotten to a point where it's losing credibility. There is Agile fatigue out there, and the actions of Agile cannot really be connected to the actual outcomes, the real business results, the impact for clients and customers. So I think the times are ripe for the industry to move on to the next big thing. Nobody knows what the next big thing is, but I say, hey, there is one that could be, and it's TameFlow.
Right.
Give it a try. Give it a try.
Yeah, why not? That sounds good. And then finally, for people who want to follow you and keep up to date with what you're doing, have you got a Twitter or a blog that you still work on that you'd like to mention?
I have a blog, but it's one of those things that goes like in periods.
Yeah.
Sometimes I write a lot, and then there is silence for for months and months on. But what I would like to do, and what I'm trying to work out how to make it happen, is to have a more, let's say, community engaged approach to teaching TameFlow.
Yeah.
So right now I'm trying to figure out how to bring that about. I do have a community site, but it's only like a forum, so it's not a real engaging platform. And that's something I'm working on. But if people want to find me, of course, you can check out TameFlow.com. You can check out my Twitter handle, which is @Tendon, Tendon. And also on LinkedIn, you will find me at as LinkedIn, LinkedIn.com/in/Tendon. It's always Tendon at the end of the
Right. Brilliant. Always Tendon. That's a great place to finish.
Allow me to tell you the story. When I started my blog in 2011-12, trying to get into the Google search engine was impossible, because anytime you wrote tendon, you always had all the broken tendons, the Achilles tendon. So all the medical stuff about tendons and how to heal the tendon and what else. And then if you were searching for Steve Tendon, you find first all the athletes, football players and so on, who had broken their tendon, and then all the Steve doctors who were healing the tendons.
Right, yeah.
So I was non-existent.
It's a lot to overcome.
Yes.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, and hopefully we'll be able to speak to you again soon.
Yes, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Hi Steve, so thanks for taking part in our first 8 questions. Always a bit of fun and a bit of laugh, allows us to get to know our guests a little bit better. So the first question that we've got for you, and this I'm looking forward to hearing the answer to this one from you. What was your first computer?
Well, I wouldn't call it a computer, but a computing device, because it was a programmable calculator in the mid-70s. Right. It was a Texas Instruments SR56. Nice. I don't remember what the SR stood for. It was such a long time ago. But I do remember what the 56 stood for.
Okay.
It had 56 programming steps. Imagine that.
Okay.
And it had everything. You could do if-thens and loops. So it was a real computing machine.
So when you say 56 steps, was that the most amount of commands you could do, or was that the number of different types of commands you could do?
It was the number of, let's say, keystrokes it could remember.
Right, okay.
A program was at most 56 keystrokes.
Now that's a good constraint to work with.
Constraints are always good,
You've got to be very creative with that. Do you remember doing any sort of coding on it? Do you remember, did you take it into exams and you'd already got something worked out that could help you kind of do some of the more complicated?
Let me tell you the story how it started, because I got it as my birthday present. My dad bought it. He was not into math or computers or anything, and he saw I liked math, so okay, let's give him a nice calculator. He bought the best of the best, brought it home. I was exhilarated. I delved through the instruction book, and I went through one of these first programs.
Yeah.
Probably the very first program I ever came across. I punched it into this machine and pressed the run button. It didn't work. It didn't work. I tried again and again, and it didn't work. So I went to Dad and said, "Hey Dad, this thing is broken. It doesn't work." So, what? It cost a fortune. Let's go to the shop. So he went to the shop and complained there. He was furious. Yeah. What did you sell me? And the guy was very calm, but he asked me, "What did you do?" And let's do it together. And we went through it, and sure, I had introduced a bug in the program. My first bug in my first program. But I got humiliated there. Dad brought me home, and he made sure that I remembered that experience. So that was my first experience.
I can imagine that scene. That sounds hilarious. A nice angry dad going in and saying, "You've sold me something," and he's like, "Well, let's just look at the code." Tell me, your first program was making it say "Hello World" at least.
Well, it was all numbers. You didn't. You could. It has one of those bar-based liquid LCDs. So you could write letters, and then you turned the device upside down, and you could read something.
Yeah.
But that program was not the Hello World. I think it was something much more numeric.
I think I know the word that you first put in there. Okay. So next question. So what is your favorite piece of software or app that you're using at the moment?
Well, the one that has been sticking around for the most and that I've used to write almost all of my books is, believe it or not, Vim.
Vim?
The text editor.
Oh, I don't really know much about Vim. What's good and bad about it?
Oh, dear. You're really missing an experience.
Right, I will check it out.
It's been part of Unix since the beginning of time. And the wonderful thing is that it's really... completely keyboard based, so you don't use the mouse.
Right.
That's why it's so hyper productive. You just fly doing things with the keyboard.
Yeah.
It's very hard to learn, I must say. But once you master it, it's really a super tool.
Right. I'll check it out. I don't know if I'll be able to overcome the learning curve, but I'll definitely look.
It's a rabbit hole. I warn you. You can get into it. You will never get out.
So with the shortcuts, is it like Shift Control P would take you somewhere and stuff like that, or is it?
Well, it's really avoiding the chords, so not combinations of key, but sequences of keys.
Right.
And it has a writing mode and a command mode, so you keep on flipping from writing to command, and then the commands are really straightforward. It's like typing words. It's like a specialized language for text manipulation.
That sounds definitely like something that I'd like to play with. I think I'll give it a go. Okay, next question. So what do you think has been your best technology purchase in the last 12 months?
Well, let's make that 24, because when I noticed that COVID was coming about, and I understood that, we're going to stay locked up for quite a while, I decided to get a desktop computer.
Okay.
The last 15 years I probably just had a laptop, just moved because I was a consultant, always on the move. So I thought I better get a desktop. But which one? And finally I settled on a Mint box, fully spec'd to the maximum specs. But the beauty of this box as well, it's small. It's maybe 40 times 40 centimeters, even less. It's lightweight. But the beauty is that there is no fan.
Oh, okay.
So no buzz, no humming, no interference with the microphones, and that for a high-performing computer, I think, is a great thing. You don't have that annoying noise in the background all the time. So I bought it because of that, and I'm really glad I did, because it's kept my sanity in these 2 years of being locked up.
It sounds quite portable as well. Are you able to take it with you and just plug it into someone else's monitor as you move around?
Yeah, if you need, it's transportable, so it's not a laptop. It's maybe like the first laptops that came out in the mid 90s, like the Toshibas. They were like bricks that you could move with two people. But yeah, you can move it around.
Do you do any gaming at all on it, or is it purely?
No, I've never been much into gaming, so, but I'm sure it could handle it. I can hook up 6 4K monitors to it if you want.
Oh, that would be cool. Imagine you could have them all the way around you.
I have only 2 for the moment.
Right. Well, I'm going to have to check that out. I want 6 monitors one day in my life, so that'd be great.
That's put it on the bucket list.
Yeah. Next question. If you had 6 months to spend abroad, somewhere that you've never lived before, where would you choose to go?
Good question. I used to be a lot into cycling, so if I could take 6 months off and work on getting fit, I'd probably go to some place where you can go on the race paths of the big cycling tours, like the Tour de France, the Giro d'Italia, or the Vuelta a España. So basically, we have mountains. That's what I would be.
Nice. So you'd be more about like the nature, the mountains, rather than sort of like an individual city that you'd want to get to.
I've had enough of cities. I'm always moving around in hotels, flights, hotels. Yeah. Actually, COVID was good because we got away from that.
Yeah. Now it's time for just
in a way
cycling up and down some hills. That sounds
exactly fresh air.
So this is a question that we always ask. If there was an item of tech that you could put into room 202, we call Concise Conversations. It's nothing to do with room 101. It's room 202. What item of technology would you put into room 202? Be banished forever?
Well, I wouldn't pick technology, but I would pick, since I am in the space of agile organizational performance and so on. Believe it or not, what I would put there is Scrum.
Scrum, right?
Scrum, yes, because Scrum had a function in its time, but then I think it has just degraded and produced more damage than good to the entire industry.
Right, get it in there.
Yes, let's kick it in.
All those Scrum masters, they need to
throw away the key.
And then finally, this is what we always think is the most important question, and you can learn most about someone from the answer to this question. What is your favorite keyboard shortcut?
Oh, I already replied to that. It's not one keyboard shortcut. It's the set of, let's say, the key binding set of Vim.
Wow.
And then, of course, I'll just show you. I don't know if you can see this, but I have like this sort of keyboard.
All right.
Which makes you fly even more.
It looks like you made that yourself. That's
no, it's one of the first split keyboards, but it's really been engineered. It's a Kinesis Advantage Pro keyboard.
Right.
I'm not associated with them, but I'm just so happy with this keyboard. I've had it for over 10 years now. Probably time to upgrade it to a new model. But it's really good because the keys are like aligned, so you just move your fingers up and down. You don't have to flip them from left to the right, and it's sculpted. It takes a bit to get used to, but I consider that as a security feature. Now, anyone coming to my computer would just get lost in trying to use it.
I'll move on to the next one that I don't understand.
Exactly.
Can I ask, where is the... All right, so on your keyboard, is the Z key next to the T, or is the Y key next to the T?
I have to look. So on this keyboard, it's split.
Right.
But the answer to your question is TY.
Right, okay. Because if you touch type, normally you use your right finger to go to the Y. So I've always thought with those ergonomical keyboards, that's just one little thing that I've never understood is why, that bit is on the wrong side.
That's no, it is on the right side. No doubt. It's often, if you're right-handed, you have some preferences of like overlapping to the other side or vice versa. So you gain like the wrong touch typing habits.
Yeah.
I learned touch typing very early on a real typewriter, a mechanical typewriter.
Yeah.
Yes. Because my mom was doing secretarial work and she was typing all the time, and I thought, no, that was fantastic. I want to learn that. So she taught me.
Oh, brilliant!
So I could touch type even before I had a computer. So I'm very close to keyboards and touch typing.
I've got a similar experience. My mum, she used to teach secretarial studies. She used to teach touch typing, so I picked it up quite early as well. But it seems like I'm still doing it wrong.
You have to get this keyboard and you're forced to
I'll try
do it right.
Brilliant. So thank you very much, Steve. It's been really great talking to you. I've had a great time.
It was a pleasure.